Today's podcast of Hellbent for Horror is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Hellbent for Horror. Audible has over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Hi, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror. I'm S.A. Bradley, and I'm a lifelong movie lover, but my heart belongs to horror. My biggest thrill, however, is getting to talk to people about this stuff. I really want to start conversations with you. I've had the pleasure of having some listeners start conversations with me recently over Twitter and email. We've traded movie and book recommendations, and many have told me a little about their first kisses with horror. There are a lot of interesting and passionate horror lovers out there, and I'm pleased to find out that many of them are also creating their own works of art. And I've been inspired by this, because when we talk about horror, we also talk about how it relates to our lives and how it relates to the world around us. So here's what I want to do. In addition to my regular shows, I want to have a roundtable style episode with some of my listeners. So if you'd like to spend an hour talking about horror with some other like-minded people, here's what I'd like you to do. Send me a paragraph about what you like about horror, or about what your favorite horror film is and why it's your favorite, or give me some detail about you as a horror fan. You can send it to my email at scott@hellbentforhorror.com. I'll look over the responses, and I'm going to put together roundtable groups, either by similar interests or maybe even opposing interests. I look forward to the conversations we're going to have. Now, Halloween is almost upon us, and I'd feel like a real monster if I didn't talk about movies to watch during the holiday. Now, with that comes a caveat or two. First, I'm kind of a problem child when it comes to making lists. I am notorious for being insanely indecisive on what I think the best horror movies are. So this is not a best of list. And secondly, lists can just feel tired, because lists creak out the same usual suspects, and that's boring for longtime horror fans. And if you're new to horror, you can find those best of lists easily on your own with just one Google search. As much as I love the movies that are on best of lists, they've been copied by so many other movies, they hold no surprises for new audiences. They are historically important, and I love them, but if they don't surprise you, they won't scare you. So with my list, I want to veer away from the devil you know so well. I want to watch a movie that surprises you for Halloween. So this is a list made up of films that are less well known. It's a mix of older and newer, American and foreign, chilling and extreme. It's not definitive, but I'm hoping there's at least one movie you've not seen before. If I can add one surprise to Halloween for both the veteran and the new horror fan, I can rest well on November 1st. The first movie on this list is Lady in White, written and directed by Frank LaLoggia. The movie follows Frankie, a boy who is haunted by the ghost of a murdered girl after he's nearly murdered himself. But that's only one of the ghosts in this movie. There's also the Lady in White herself, searching for her lost daughter at night. And there's a ghoul who may or may not be lurking in the local haunted house. And then there's the all-too-real human monsters that are in the film. It's a weird mix of ghost story, coming-of-age film, family portrait, and murder mystery. And yet, it is thoroughly enchanting. It is a good story told well. But it's on my Halloween movie list because it's possibly the best evocation of Halloween through a child's eyes that I've ever seen on film. It takes place in a small town in New York State in the 1960s, and it gets all the beats right. The elementary school Halloween party is so detailed, you can almost smell the candy bars. In the exterior shots, you can feel the chill of winter closing in fast and the chill of death. There's also the elementary school coat room, which figures prominently in the plot, and the director captures just how creepy this little room could feel to a kid. There are a few well-placed shocks and jumps in the movie, especially when we see the various ghosts die again and again, trapped to repeat their pain forever. And yet, the sequences with the human killer are more frightening than the supernatural. There's a scene involving a bow and arrow practice that is so suspenseful, I'd put it up there with anything by Hitchcock. If you're looking for a well-done ghost story, give Lady in White a try. Now, since we're talking about ghost stories, the next movie is one of the best I've ever seen. This is Guillermo del Toro's The Devil's Backbone. This movie is both a ghost story and a disturbing look at the monsters that wars create. The movie takes place at the end of the Spanish Civil War. A young boy named Carlos is sent to an orphanage after his father is killed in the war. The orphanage is in a remote part of Spain with desert all around it. The headmistress and her partner, Dr. Caceres, are on the losing side of this war. They know the day will come when Franco's army comes to kill them, but they hide this from the children. Because in this world, being an orphan boy isn't going to get you any mercy when the end comes. Like all of Del Toro's films, there is a surreal beauty and an odd poetry that is punctuated by moments of brutal and graphic violence. There's a large, unexploded bomb that sticks out of the ground at the center of the courtyard, and it's a constant reminder that the children's lives could end at any moment. And then there's the ghost. It's of a young boy named Santi who haunts the orphanage at night. This ghost is horrible beautiful. He's tiny and pale, and he wears his pajamas. And he has a huge gash in his skull that billows ghostly blood upwards as if he were underwater. Santi comes with a message. Many of you will die. There are plenty of chilling and creepy moments, and the real world is just as creepy as the ghostly one. There's a groundskeeper who has a violent temper, and he unleashes it on the boys. And then there's the phantom army whose shadows on the horizon ripple in the desert heat. The movie is effective because Del Toro remembers what being a young boy can be like, how your friends and your enemies can be the same people, depending on what their mood is. And even the toughest of the boys has a monster or two he's afraid of. If you love some grit in your ghost story, give The Devil's Backbone a watch. A group of travelers, 3 men, 2 women, and a small boy, walk into a bar. They make no effort to be quiet, and they anger the bikers and the truckers that are already in there. One of the men in the group wears a leather jacket and boots with spurs. He looks at the patrons and says, "Well, I'll be goddamned, shit kicker heaven." He antagonizes the patrons until he provokes a fight. The fight is very short. One punch sends a trucker flying an impossible distance. Then the leader of this group of travelers goes to the bar door and closes it and locks it. The bartender nervously asks, "What do you people want?" The man just looks back at him and says, "Just a couple more minutes of your time, about the same duration as the rest of your lives." Welcome to Kathryn Bigelow's Near Dark. In 1987, before vampires got popular again, Kathryn Bigelow and writer Eric Red combined the horror movie with Western tropes and gave us gritty outlaw bloodsuckers. If Sam Peckinpah's Wild Bunch were modern-day vampires, you'd have Near Dark. The story is about a young cowhand named Caleb who has a nighttime fling with a young girl named May. She tells him he's never met a girl like her. May is a vampire. She falls in love with Caleb, so instead of killing him, she bites him to turn him into a vampire, and then she takes him home to meet the family. Her family is a nomadic group of vampires led by Jesse Hooker. Jesse is this surrogate family's father figure, and Dad doesn't think much of the new boyfriend. And neither does Severin. He's the equivalent of the big brother. He's crazy, reckless, homicidal, and he's content to rip Caleb's face off just for the fun of it. But because Caleb's been bit, they follow the outlaw code to give him a chance to join the team. And this starts an odyssey of ruthless murder and manhunts as the clan travels the countryside at night by RV. And time is running out on Caleb. If he can't kill and join the family, they will tear him apart. Near Dark is a criminally underseen film. It opened the same week as the much more popular Lost Boys, and it got left in the dust, which is a shame because Near Dark, as far as I'm concerned, is a much better horror film, full of great action set pieces, operatic violence, and a ton of visual style from Kathryn Bigelow. There are 2 amazing sequences that are so good, you can taste adrenaline in your mouth. You'll know them when you see them. So if you like your vampires dusty, dirty, and dangerous, watch Near Dark. Years ago, a popular critic said that the Western lived on in the road picture. because both are essentially quests where the characters go into the wilderness and they battle for their own survival. And that brings me to director Jim Mickle's Stakeland, the vampire apocalypse road movie. Yes, that's right, the apocalypse won't be zombies. Instead, civilization is wiped out by a pandemic that's caused by a species of ugly, feral creatures, vampires. The story is told by a boy named Martin, whose mother and father are murdered by a vampire. But Martin is saved by a lone vampire hunter known only as Mr. Mr. has been on the road a long time, and he is an efficient killing machine. He takes Martin with him, but the boy needs to learn how to kill as well, so Mr. trains him. And this starts a bloody odyssey to find a place called New Eden, up where Canada used to be. And like a good road picture, they encounter other survivors and encampments along the way, and plenty of vicious bloodsuckers. They also run into the worst of humanity in fundamentalist militiamen that are known as the Brotherhood, who think the plague is divine intervention, and that they can do anything they want. Stakeland is a standout horror film because it takes time to build a complicated relationship between Martin and Mr. But the great thing about Stakeland is its complete commitment to the story. This is a low-budget film that refuses to let the price tag get in the way of ambition. Director Jim Mickle packs the movie with natural locations, interesting subplots, and new characters along the way, all who have great backstories. If you love smart independent horror films, give Stakeland a shot. But if I'm going to talk about smart, low-budget horror films, I would be remiss to not talk about Larry Fessenden's Habit. Fessenden starred, wrote, and directed this film set in New York City. It's a story of Sam, an alcoholic artist who spirals into the abyss after the death of his father. He ends his relationships, and he isolates into the bottle. But then he has a chance encounter with a beautiful and androgynous woman named Anna. She likes her sex kinky and rough, and Sam finds this to be a pretty good diversion, until she bites his lip to draw blood, and the blood turns her on. But as the time goes on, the sex gets even more intense, and she draws more blood. He freaks out and calls it quits. And then Sam starts to get sick, and he starts to believe that Anna has done it to him, and that she's a vampire. Is the sickness caused by alcoholism, or is she a vampire who addicts him to the bite so she can have a slave for blood? Is he paranoid and going mad? This movie is a slow burn that keeps you guessing until the intense ending. Habit is Larry Fessenden's homage to Dracula, and it's full of clever nods to the original. Now, the movie is ultra-low budget, so Fessenden uses apartments in New York City at night as his locations. And his choices capture the hustle, the danger, and the paranoia of New Yorkers. And he makes Gotham feel damn near gothic. If you're looking for a more adult take on vampires, watch Habit. So we did ghosts and vampires, now let's go to werewolves. Traditionally, werewolves have been metaphors for the beast you hide inside you, or the part that rebels against normal society. They are the outcasts. Lycanthropy is a curse, and werewolves have been associated with the masculine since poor Larry Talbot got bit and changed in the full moon. Now, why is he connected to the phases of the moon? I don't know. I never asked. And then I saw director John Fawcett's brilliant Ginger Snaps, and I realized something. I've been backing the wrong metaphor all these years. This werewolf thing makes so much more sense if they're women. Hey, let's face it, fellas, women and blood are a more natural metaphoric match. It is called the curse, after all. And whose body is ruled by the monthly moon phase once the body transformation starts? And what about that transformation? Are there any guys who would want to trade places with a woman whose body transforms so it can carry a living being inside it and feed it? Hell, that makes jock itch seem tolerable. Sure, we sprout more hair, but women have that problem too. And finally, who is considered more of an outcast in polite society if they are aggressive, particularly sexually aggressive? See, werewolves just make more sense when they're women. The story revolves around two misfit sisters. There's Bridget, who's the wallflower, and Ginger, who is too aggressive for the other girls at school. They don't have any friends, so really they are each other's worlds. One night, Ginger is viciously attacked in a park by a wild animal that has been killing the neighborhood pets. This beast was attracted to the menstruation of Ginger's first period. She escapes, but she appears critically wounded. However, by the time she gets to her house, the wounds have miraculously healed. She makes Bridget swear to keep all this a secret, but it's soon apparent that Ginger is changing into someone or something Bridget and her family just don't recognize anymore. Director John Fawcett and screenwriter Karen Walton set out to reinterpret the werewolf story, and I think they succeeded. Sure, puberty was used as a metaphor in I Was a Teenage Werewolf, but it was barely inferred. Ginger Snaps dives right into the mess of puberty and revels in it. The movie is full of sharp satire about sexual politics, sexual confusion, and just the terror of finding yourself at the mercy of your own body that's going out of control. This movie doesn't forget it's a horror film. Ginger Snaps is gory and queasy. It's a movie with some gorgeous werewolf effects as well. So if you want an original and well-made werewolf movie, give Ginger Snaps a look. In my opinion, Frankenstein is probably the greatest original idea in horror history, and it is also probably the most well-suited for different interpretations and allegories. Two recent and very clever interpretations of Frankenstein are Lucky McKee's May and American Mary, directed by the Soska sisters. The first image we see in Lucky McKee's May is someone jabbing their eye out with scissors. We are in shock, and we will continue to be in shock for most of the movie. The main character is May, an awkward woman who's been lonely all her life. She suffered a friendless childhood where her only companion was a China doll named Susie, who she still has in a glass case in her apartment. She talks to Susie, and Susie talks back to her. We start to suspect that loneliness has slowly driven May insane. And yet, director Lucky McKee and actress Angela Bettis make us sympathize with May. We want her to find love, which makes us love her as well. And because we're emotionally invested in May, it makes what she does absolutely horrifying. Because May alienates anyone she falls in love with. She's even too weird for weirdos. So she decides she'll just make her own friend out of the best parts of people she likes. Literally. If you have the stomach for the gore, and if you want to see Angela Bettis give one of the greatest acting performances ever in a horror film, watch May. Highly recommended. And that brings me to American Mary, directed by Jen and Sylvia Soska. I love this movie. This is a great horror movie and a thoroughly original reworking of Frankenstein. You may not agree, you're wrong. In this movie, the Frankenstein monster isn't a person. It's a career. And it's a career that destroys its creator. The story follows Mary Mason, a struggling medical student practicing to become a surgeon. Like all students, she struggles for funds. So she tries to trade money off of her body as a stripper. However, once word gets around the strip club that sees a surgeon in training, Mary finds herself involved in the lucrative world of body modification. It's black market work, and Mary gets a reputation as a surgeon who has no limits. Unfortunately, the chief surgeon at her hospital spies Mary at the strip club, and he assumes she's exploitable. He invites her to an exclusive party for surgeons only, where she's drugged and raped. After the party, Mary quits school and becomes a full-time body modification surgeon. Most of the modifications she does are consensual. Most of them. Because she has revenge on her mind. Now, this movie is all about the body. It's about how we are seen by others based on our bodies, and how other people use our bodies against us, or how a spouse claims ownership of our bodies as if it were the property of them as well. Who owns the pound of flesh on the scale? This isn't Todd Browning's Freaks. The body modifications here are what people do to break free from the molds that other people have forced them into. There's a character in the film who requests an extreme body modification that digs right into how women can feel like nothing more than objects. You'll know her when you see her. I am positive only a woman would have written that part. It is a revolution, and the villagers light up the torches when they find out about it. I talked to a friend about this movie. He didn't like it because he didn't think Mary was likable. Really? Did you think Victor Frankenstein was likable? Now, why does Mary have to be likable? And therein lies the reason Mary's revolution has bite. If you're up for a highly original take on Frankenstein, I recommend American Mary. Every so often I hear somebody mention how out of hand horror movies have gotten recently, how they're just being shocking for the sake of shock. And I smile, and I think back to the good old days when Ken Russell walked the earth. The next movie on my list is Ken Russell's The Devils. It was made 45 years ago, and if it played today, it would be banned all around the world. Of course, that's what happened when it came out in 1971. In fact, the movie was such an insane mixture of disturbingly violent, sexual, and religious content that the original version of The Devils was never released in theaters. They had to cut 14 minutes out of it. 14 minutes! That's pretty big. Now, The Devils is based on a true event, but Russell might have exaggerated a little. It's a 17th century Roman Catholic priest named Urbain Grandier who was burned at the stake for witchcraft after demonic possession spread through his town of Loudun, France. The movie shows the evil that happens when there's no separation between church and state. The king and the church plan a power grab across France, so they demand all fortifications around cities removed so that they can march in at will. However, the city of Loudun is controlled by the beloved priest Grandier, and he has public support to keep the protective walls up and in place. But everything falls apart when a hunchback nun at a local convent named Sister Jean d'Agnes becomes sexually obsessed with Grandier. She claims her sexual obsession is demonic possession. The king and the church agree. In fact, they say that the entire convent of sexually repressed nuns is possessed by Grandier. And when the nuns hear that they are possessed, they believe they are possessed. They are now free to act out all their pent-up rage. And that is when all hell breaks loose. The Devils is definitely a horror film, but it's not a jump scare type of horror film. This is the kind of horror movie where the hairs start to raise on your arms while you watch it, and they don't go back down until the movie is over. If you're looking to raise a little hell on Halloween, try Ken Russell's The Devils. So let's jump from one madman director to another. If you've ever seen the movies of Alejandro Jodorowsky, you know it's a fool's errand to try and summarize the plot. Like David Lynch or Dario Argento, Jodorowsky's movies are felt more than they're read. He bombards you with so many images and ideas, you feel like you're either in a dream or in a nightmare. And Santa Sangre is one of his nightmares. It is horrible beautiful from beginning to end. The story follows Phoenix. He's the son of circus performers, and we follow him through his traumatic and psychotic childhood to his even more traumatic and psychotic adulthood. His father was the knife thrower at the circus, and his mother was a trapeze artist. His mother was also a religious fanatic who worshipped a murdered girl as a saint. The girl was killed by her brothers, who cut off her arms and left her to bleed to death. As a child, Phoenix witnesses a violent family argument that spirals way out of control. In a mad rage, his father cuts off his mother's arms, and then he commits suicide by splitting his own throat right in front of the boy. When we see Phoenix as an adult, he's an inmate at a hellish insane asylum. One night, he sees his armless mother calling to him from outside his window. We don't know if she's real or not, but he escapes the asylum and he follows her. Phoenix believes that his mother has taken control of his body. He grabs his father's old knives, stands directly behind his mother, slides his arms around her sides, and he becomes her arms. And this begins a surreal and completely unhinged killing spree. Santa Sangre means holy blood, and there's plenty of sangre splattered all over this movie. Jodorowsky's non-stop disturbing images make this much more unsettling than a regular slasher film. There's something deep and dark at the center of this movie. If you're in the mood to watch a waking nightmare, watch Santa Sangre. Now, I'm not a fan of most found footage movies, but I was impressed and genuinely creeped out by the Poughkeepsie tapes, written and directed by the Dowdle brothers. Instead of the conceit of watching footage from a lost documentary crew, this movie starts like we just turned on the History Channel and a serial killer documentary's on. The mock documentary features talking head interviews with FBI profilers and the like, but in between the interviews, we watch the killer's VHS videotape diaries of his murders. Those diaries are the Poughkeepsie tapes. The movie cleverly keeps information from us, exposing the mystery and the horror slowly. The more interviews we see with the profilers, the more we come to realize they haven't caught this killer yet. And the video diaries get weirder and more diabolical. And we realize that the killings have been going on much longer than we thought, because there are 800 Poughkeepsie tapes. And we realize that this footage was meant to be found. And the killer knows that we are watching. That's the Poughkeepsie tapes. So we've talked about monsters that are supernatural and monsters that are human. Is there a third category? Well, here are two movies that suggest a third option. Now, we've all suffered from earworms, that jingle or song that you can't get out of your head. What if, instead of just being annoying, it could be dangerous, even fatal? What if a word or a phrase or an entire language could be a virus that infects your mind? The words repeat in your mind in a cycle, and they create an unconditional loop that crashes the part of your brain that controls reason. And the only part of your mind left running was the lizard brain, ready to attack anything that moves. That's the premise at the center of Bruce McDonald's Pontypool. The spoken word is the monster, and anyone who hears them becomes a violent, mindless zombie. The story follows shock jock Grant Massey, who is at a career low in a dead-end radio station in Pontypool, Ontario. Suddenly, this shock jock is thrust into the role of live commentator on a riot that breaks out in the sleepy, small town. The initial news from the traffic reporter on the scene is confusing. People he knows, his neighbors, are attacking and killing each other for no reason. Some scream gibberish. Some repeat a single word over and over, or they are reduced to baby talk. As the reporter describes this scene, the word sample starts crawling into all of his sentences. It gets worse until all he says is sample, 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 and then the line goes dead. In Pontypool, we get the story at the same time as Grant does, and we are trapped in the radio station with him. All we can do is listen, and listening is deadly. Imagine Orson Welles' War of the Worlds mixed with Night of the Living Dead, and you have Pontypool. In the wildly ambitious movie The Signal, a mysterious transmission invades every cell phone, radio, and television, which turns people who see it or hear it into killers. The catch? They don't realize they're doing anything wrong. They continue to talk about the weather while they bludgeon their friend to death with a baseball bat, which means you don't see any signs of an infection until the person next to you tries to stab you. This is a horror film told in 3 parts, or 3 transmissions, from 3 different perspectives of an apocalypse where everyone calmly and politely kills each other. This movie is a splatter film, a black comedy, a psychedelic head trip, and even a post-apocalyptic love story. If you're looking for a totally unique take on a zombie apocalypse but you're tired of zombies, try Pontypool or The Signal. Of course, the good thing about horror movies is that they can be simple and straightforward stories and still be good and scary. You can have a general setup you've seen plenty of times, but it's how the story is told that can still make a horror film great. It's presentation and creating a mood and respect for timing and understanding horror films enough to subvert our expectations that lets us be surprised and scared. So here's a list of movies that gave me at least 2 good scares, created a good mood, and subverted my expectations. The Descent, directed by Neil Marshall. Quite simply, the best monsters and caves movie ever made, period. The story: a group of spelunking women go into the caves and meet monsters. It's full of nods to Alien, The Thing, and even The Shining, but it is its own beast. It's got a great mood and made me feel claustrophobic at least a few times. And Neil Marshall is a master of pacing for maximum jump. He hits all the right beats. If you see it, make sure to watch the unrated version. That version has the original ending they didn't use for the theater release, and that ending is perfect. The Strangers, directed by Brian Bertino. Yes, I know the plot bears a striking resemblance to the French film They, directed by David Moreau, but I think The Strangers is a better film, and scarier. The story: 2 people are stalked and hunted inside their house by masked killers. Now, this movie is a master's class in suspense and keeping the viewer off balance. Director Brian Bertino starts scenes without setup, drops us right in the middle, and uses sounds to distract and disturb us, and goes without a soundtrack, so we are left with only natural sound. He draws out the suspense so long, I swear he had a psychologist on set to tell him when he went too far. He does it so well that I knew one of the big scares was going to happen, and he set the moment so well I still jumped. That's rare praise. A Tale of Two Sisters, directed by Ji-won Kim. This is a ghost story from South Korea that old horror hounds will figure out pretty fast, but this is all about the execution and the scares. Like The Strangers, this movie sets a tone and uses deliberate pacing to set you up for when those ghosts start showing up. The visuals used when the ghosts appear are twisted and bizarre and unsettling. The mixture of beauty and low-light photography to accentuate shadows draws you closer to the screen, and then pow! Very few ghost stories have moments that scare me. A Tale of Two Sisters had 2 that made me pause a DVD and get up and walk around. Alice, Sweet Alice, directed by Alfred Soule. This movie came out in 1976, before the slasher film was invented, but it was smack dab in the Grindhouse period, and it is a creepy little demon spawn of those 2 styles. The story: a 12-year-old girl may or may not have murdered her younger sister at her first Holy Communion, and may or may not be murdering people snooping around for clues. Everything about this movie is seedy and grubby and creepy. Everything in it is there to make you feel unsettled and uncomfortable. The murder of the little sister and the disposal of the body within the church is grotesque. The 12-year-old girl is weirdly sexual, not alluring, more like mentally ill. There's an obese pervert who makes you want to take a shower when you see him. The apartment building and the locations are all drab, muted colors and just covered with dirt. And that makes the visual image of the killer, who wears a bright yellow rain slicker and a bizarre translucent mask, even more frightening when it appears. The attacks are surprisingly bloody and brutal, and there's one murder that takes over a minute to develop, and it is one of the most horrifying deaths I've ever seen. The Pact, directed by Nicholas McCarthy. The story: the daughter of an abusive mother returns to the house of her youth after her mother dies and her older sister disappears, and there's at least one entity in the house. This is one of those movies where the first 15 minutes are so perfect, you forgive the director when the middle is a little flabby. You're still reeling from that 15 minutes. Director Nicholas McCarthy uses Steadicam and one continuous shot in several scenes within the house that make you flinch every time a character turns a blind corner. This is some chilling modern ghost story stuff. Highly recommended. Session 9, directed by Brad Anderson. This movie is Shirley Jackson's Legend of Hill House, set in an actual abandoned mental institution, the Danvers State Insane Asylum in Danvers, Massachusetts, to be correct. The story: an asbestos removal crew work in the hospital under stressful conditions, and the old spirits might just be possessing one or more of the crew. This is such a chilling slow burn of a movie. The movie shot in cinema verite style, and it was one of the first films shot on digital video. And those things make Session 9 feel more like a documentary than a scripted film. Add to that the naturally creepy location, the lack of soundtrack music, and Anderson's clever use of echoey tape recordings, and you're scared without seeing one supernatural event. The ending is fantastic, and it feels like literature in how poetic it is. And the last line will haunt you and would make Shirley Jackson proud. Jeepers Creepers, directed by Victor Salva. Let's end this list with a straight-up monster movie. It doesn't want to be anything more than that, and I think that's why it's so effective. The story: a brother and sister stumble upon the lair of a monster and must run for their lives. It's a simple premise, but from the first scene, Jeepers Creepers is subverting your expectations and doing it by showing you a typical setup and then twisting it around. The first scare in the movie is hiding in plain sight and is pure Hitchcock suspense. And then at other times, Victor Salva reveals only part of the story, only to have something like an errant flashlight beam tell us something much more terrifying is in the room. This movie is pure visual storytelling. You could turn off the volume and still get it, and that is remarkably hard to do. And just when you think you know what's going on, new information comes into the movie and knocks you for a loop. And just when you think the movie can't get any weirder, it gets weirder. And then there's the ending of the movie. Let's just say it is grotesque, chilling, and a perfect way to end Halloween night. I hope you heard something that makes you put one of your old standby DVDs back in its case and lets you decide to take a chance on a movie that might surprise you. Hey, what better time of the year to go with a devil you don't know, right? Happy Halloween from Hellbent for Horror. And thanks for listening to my show. I'd love to hear back from you. You can email me directly at scott@hellbentforhorror.com. And I've also updated my Hellbent for Horror website, hellbentforhorror.com. You can download every episode directly from there, read any newsletters, and you can go to any of my social websites and emails all from the homepage. You can IM me on my Facebook page at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and you can find me on Twitter at hellbenthorror. A lot of the great conversations I have with fans happens on Twitter at hellbenthorror. Now, for you, the listeners of Hellbent for Horror, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Hellbent for Horror. If you like the show and you're curious about audiobooks, sign up for the service through Hellbent for Horror. It helps make this podcast sustainable for me. I thank you in advance. And thank you for listening, folks. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can now subscribe to the Hellbent for Horror podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Player FM, and Stitcher. And if you like the show, please consider writing a review on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play. It really helps. Till next time, stay hellbent.